Okay, good morning. Today's daf is Yud Gimel. We're going to start from Yud Bet, Amud Bet at the bottom, Masekhet Shabbat, where it says, Be'emet Amru. It says, in truth, they said, HaChazan. Now what was this? The Chazan of the Mishnah is not the Chazan that sings tefillot. The Chazan is the person who organizes the Kriyat Torah. He's more like the Gabai, or the teacher of the children. So, in the beginning it says, he can look. It said, Be'emet Amru. In truth, they said that he can look at the place where the children are reading from, but he can't read to the light of a candle. So, Va'amrat Resha Ro'eh, my lovely krot. So what does it mean he should look? He can look at the place, but he can't read. Isn't looking and reading, what's the purpose of looking? It's to read, right? Lo lisader rashe parshiotav. What it is he needs to organize the heads of the chapters. Now there are two possible meanings to this. Either what it means is that he has to look at the places where the kids are going to be reading the following day, because he's teaching the children, or as he's teaching the children, he has to look at the beginning of the chapter to see where they're reading, and then the kids will read, as we'll see. Or it means that he's organizing the aliyot to be read the next morning in the synagogue, and therefore he needs to look at the Rashi Parshiotav, he has to look at the headings of the different parts of the Torah, so that he can apportion the aliyot properly. And since he knows, as Rashi says, umritzan befiv, he can then recite them by heart. Because once he looks at the beginning of the parasha, now he's able to remember the entirety of it by heart. And either whether he's teaching it or he is helping those who are coming up to read their aliyot, whatever he might be doing, as Rashi says, shiva korim bin kuda v'tameh, that he would help the people who are called up for the aliyot read their aliyah by giving them the ta'amim, giving them the tune, and giving them the nikud, giving them the nikudot, the proper vowelization of the words and pronunciation of the words. So whatever he was doing, all he needed to do was look at the heads of the parashiot, and he was able to remember the rest, either for teaching or for helping with the Torah reading. That's what Rabbi Bar Shmuel said, that he's allowed to be misadir, to organize the heads of the chapters. In other words, he can look at the beginning of the chapter, he'll remember the rest. The Chula Parasha Lo, is it true that he can't look at the entire parasha? As we turn to Yud Gimel, Meidiveh, there is an objection. Rabban Shema Megamliel Omer Hatinokot Shel Beit Rabban Hayu Misadrin Parshiot V'Korin L'Oraner. It says that the children of Beit Rabban, the children in school who would study on Shabbat, would read on Friday nights by the light of a candle. They would read the parasha by the light of a candle. So doesn't that seem to imply that they would read the entire parasha by the light of a candle? So he says, two possible answers. Rashi Parashiotav, what it means is even the children were only allowed to read the beginnings of each of the chapters, and then they had to recite the rest by heart. That's a pretty high standard of teaching. Alternatively, Rashi Parshiotav, that there's a difference. Children, if they come to read the parasha by the light of the candle, they're not going to tilt the lamp, because they would not take upon themselves. You wouldn't, imagine you're a child in school, you wouldn't go adjust the lights in the classroom. Only the teacher would do that. You would be afraid to get in trouble. So the child is not going to get up and tilt the lamp. So as long as there's the adult there, he's not allowed to read by the light of the candle, but he can watch the children reading, and he knows that they won't tilt the lamp because he's going to be there watching over them and supervising. And both of these principles are brought down as halacha, that a person is allowed, for example, let's say he has the light of a candle to read by. If he knows what he's reading by heart and he just needs to remember the beginning to get him started, he can look at the first line and then remember the rest by heart. And if children are learning by the light of a candle, that's okay, as long as the teacher is there, because we're not worried that they will tilt the lamp. At the end of the Mishnah, it said that similarly, when we're on the topic of things you're not supposed to do because you might, out of habit, do something else that's worse, it said the zav and the zava. The zav is a person who has an emission from his genital area, and the zava is also a woman who is having not her nida, not the regular monthly cycle, but something in excess of that. But a zava is prohibited to have relations with her husband, just like a nida. It's the same. Actually, we treat all of our nidot today with the same rules as zava. So it says the zav and the zava cannot eat at the same table because it might accustom them to do a sin. Now, the way that we handle this today is when a woman is in nida, we put some kind of what's called the heker. We put some kind of a reminder on the table to allow the husband and wife to sit at the same table while the wife is in the state of nida, so that they don't come to any averot. However, the basic din is that they're not allowed to eat at the same table. We just get around it by putting something to remind us on the table. So, Tanya, it says in the Brayta, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, ad hechan paratzata Rabbi Yisrael. Look how pure the Jewish people are. Look how far purity has extended in the Jewish people. Shalosh anino liochal hatahorim atmeah. Because the Mishnah didn't choose a case, lo yochal hatahorim atmeah, that the pure person shouldn't eat with his wife who's in nida or zava. That a zav shouldn't eat with a zava, implying that a person who was tahor, when they were so careful and meticulous about purity and impurity, that someone who was pure wouldn't even think of eating at the table with his wife who is not pure, because they didn't want to become tameh. But they're going even further in the Mishnah and saying that even if you're already tameh, you shouldn't sit at the same table with her. And even though it's uncomfortable to engage in relations for the zav also, so it's not something he would normally do, he should avoid eating at the same table at a romantic dinner with his wife, because it might lead to other things. Similarly, it says that a zav parush, a zav who is careful about the laws of purity and impurity even in his personal life, because there were many Talmidei Chachamim. They were called Perushim. Perushim are the Pharisees, they're called in English, okay? Parush means that he's very careful about halakha, he's a Talmid Chacham, he's a scholar. He also is probably careful even in his personal life, in his personal kashrut. He applies the laws of purity and impurity even to his personal kashrut. So he's at a very high level of observance with a Zav Amaretz. So even though they're both Zavim, they're both impure at this time. So they can't make one another more impure, but he shouldn't eat with the zav was an amharetz. Why? Shema yargilenu etzlo, because he might get used to hanging out with this guy. Now on the surface it sounds like that means he's going to be a bad influence. If the Talmid Chacham, because they're both Zavim right now, they end up hanging out, and then the bad guy, or the ignorant guy ends up hanging out with the Talmid Chacham, he's going to have a bad influence on him. But that's not what it means. So what's the problem if they hang out together? That maybe this Ama'aretz, this ignoramus, is going to feed our scholarly Zav some impure things. What are you talking about? They're both Zavim. Anything they touch becomes impure. Even if you're a Talmid Chacham, you're not exempt from it. So what does it mean? So what if he feeds him something impure? It's going to be impure anyway. Rather, Amar Abaye says, true, he might be impure. But what if this Am Haaretz is not careful about tithing his produce? So true, this whatever he gives him, the food he gives him, the vegetables are going to be impure as soon as he touches them. But what if he didn't separate the tithe, or the terumah, or the ma'aser for the kohanim and leviim, and now he feeds that to the zav, to the Talmid Chacham? So the problem is that even when you're impure, you're allowed to eat regular vegetables. It's just that the vegetables had to have had the ma'aser or the terumah taken out of them before. So we have to be worried he's going to basically feed him non-kosher food, essentially. In Israel, that would be non-kosher food, where they have terumot and ma'asrot regularly. So what's the problem? But for Rava says, no, Rova me'aretz mastering him. We're not worried that this Ama'aretz, that this ignoramus is going to feed him essentially non-kosher food, untithed food. The concern is that right now they're both tameh. So we're not concerned about tum'ah. But what if they end up saying, hey, we were hanging out together when we were Zavim, let's go and hang out together when we're Tahor? The problem is that the Ama'aretz, the rest of the time, is not careful about only eating things that are Tahor, because you don't have to. That was a stringency that the Perushim, that the Talmidei Chachamim observed. It wasn't something that the Amei Haaretz observed. So when they were both Tame'im, there was an even playing field, right? A level playing field. But now that they're Tahor, the Talmid Chacham is very strict, only to eat pure things. He's Ochel, they say, he's Ochel Chulin al Taorat HaKodesh, that even his regular food he keeps to a level of purity. The Amei Haaretz is not like that. The ignoramus is not going to observe that. So you might give him things that are actually Tame'im, and the Talmid Chacham is not going to realize it. So therefore you shouldn't hang out with them even when they're both Tame'im, because when they're Torim there could be a problem. We're not concerned that he's not going to tithe the produce, like what Abaye said. We're concerned that maybe he's going to feed him Dvarim Tame'im when he's someone.
That they're concerned about that, and they're not seeing the possibility that the Talmid Chacham may have
a good influence. Yeah, it's true. It's true.
On
They should hang out, but just not over food. Maybe that's, I don't know. It's a good question. I was thinking the same thing. So now we say, by the way, they asked the following question. So what is the halacha of a woman and a man who are married, obviously, sleeping in the same bed when the woman is in nida if they wear clothes? Now remember, back in those days, they did not wear clothes when they slept. They used a blanket. But it was common practice. You would take off your clothes and you would sleep in the nude. So that was the way that they did it. So if you were sleeping in the bed with your clothes on, it was already somewhat of a separation. So everybody agrees that when a woman is in nida, the husband and wife cannot sleep in the same bed unclothed. There's no question. But what about when they have clothing on? So there's already something reminding them that it's different than usual. So that's the question. Amar Rav Yosef says, Tashma, come and listen. Ha'of ole ima givina ala shulchan ve'eno nechal divrei Beit Shammai. This is a Mishnah from Chulin. It says that you can bring chicken and cheese to the table, but you can't eat them together. That's what Beit Shammai says. Beit Hillel omer lo ole v'lo nechal. However, Beit Hillel says it can't come up on the table and it can't be eaten together. This is a Mishnah, one of the first Mishnah, or the first Mishnah, or the second Mishnah in the 8th Perek of Chulin that talks about basar b'chalav, depending on whether how they divide up the Mishnayot. Sometimes it's counted as the first part of the first. Sometimes it's Sometimes it's considered the second Mishnah. But in any case, what do you see from here? This is one of the cases where Beit Hillel is stringent, incidentally. So Beit Hillel says you can't even bring chicken and milk up to the same table, let alone eat it. Beit Shammai says you can't eat it, but you know what? It's only a rabbinical prohibition, so we're not going to do what's called gezerah legezerah. We're not going to say that, you can't eat chicken with milk, and that's already only a rabbinical prohibition. And I'm going to add another rabbinical prohibition that you can't bring it to the table. So Beit Hillel says, no, it's all one gezerah. So therefore, even though it's rabbinical, the rabbinical rule was treat chicken like meat. And therefore, all the laws of meat are going to apply to it. But in any case, what's the point? Just like putting chicken and milk on the same table is a no-no, putting the husband and wife on the same bed is a no-no. That's basically the point of what Rav Yosef is trying to say. However, wait a second. There's a difference. Because Shani atam de lekadeot. Because over there, when you put chicken and milk on the same table, there's not two people involved. It's one person. In other words, the concern is that you, Yonatan, are sitting at a table where there's chicken and milk. You're going to take a little chicken, you're going to take a little dairy, you're not going to realize it, and you're going to eat it. Leka deot. There's not two people. But when it comes to nida, the husband and wife, it takes two to tango, right? So the husband and wife are both there, and one of them will remind the other. So maybe we can't infer from the case of basar b'chalav, from chicken and milk. And he says, Hachinami mistabra, and it makes sense. We can even show a proof that when there's more than one person involved, it's more lenient. Dekatani sefa, because it says at the end of that Mishnah, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, Shnei achsenayim ochlin al shulchan echad, ze ochel basar, ze ochel gevina, ve'en chosheshin. If you come to a cafeteria in the middle of nowhere, two guests, or two guests in a hotel, and they take out, and you take out your meat sandwich, and he takes out dairy, it's no problem, because there are two people there. So we're not concerned that you're going to take from the dairy to eat while you're eating your meat. We're not concerned that he's going to take from your meat while he's eating dairy, because there are two people, one will remind the other. When you're alone, it's more of a concern. So therefore we could say the same thing by nida, that the husband and wife will remind each other and they won't come to violate the prohibition. Vela vitmar Allah, but that's not a good analogy again, because Amar Rav Chanin Bar Ami Amar Shmuel, because Rav Chanin Bar Ami said, Shmuel said lo shanu el shein mekirin zeh zeh aval mekirin zeh zeh asurim, because we said that that's only true when they don't know each other. In other words, you're in the cafeteria in the Museum of Natural History, and you sit down and some other guy sits down at the other table. He's eating dairy, you're eating meat. You don't know this guy. You're not going to take his food. But when you're sitting with somebody that you know, sometimes you share food. So there it's a concern. So in the same way, when the husband and wife are in the same bed, we're concerned. If they didn't know each other and they're sharing the same bed because they're in a crazy situation, fine. But in a situation where they know each other, that's a different story. And obviously the husband and wife know each other. So therefore we can apply the more stringent rule and say they can't be in the same bed because they know each other. So now the Gemara says, Hachi hashta, can you really say that? Hatam deot ika shinui leka. Hacha ika deot vika shinui. What are you talking about? We have two positive things in the case of the woman and man in the bed together. Because first of all, there are two people. Just like when you have the two guests who are at the same table. And yeah, they know each other, but here we have shinui. We have two people who can remind each other, and we also have a shinui. There's a difference. In other words, they've done something differently. They're wearing their clothes to bed. Since they're wearing their clothes to bed, and there are two people, that's a double reason to be lenient. So now the Gemara gives an alternative version of this discussion. Some report as follows: Tashima, that the argument went a little bit differently. It's the same upshot, but different argument. Rabban Shimon Gamliel Omer Shnei Achsanaim Ochlin Al Shulchan Echad Zeh Basar V'Zeh Gvina V'Yitmar Allah Amar Rav Chanin Bar Ami Amar Shmuel Lo Shanu Ela Shein Mekirin Zeh Zeh Aval Mekirin Zeh Zeh Asur. Okay, so we said the same. In other words, the same line of reasoning, but sort of just starting from a different point of the reasoning. That Rabban Shimon Gamliel said that if there were two people sitting at the same table, one can eat meat and one can eat dairy, but that's only if they don't know each other. And here we have the same case that the man and the woman, they know each other. So therefore we can't prove anything, because here we have one up on that case. So basically it brings us to the same point, just starting from a different point of departure in the discussion, but basically the same discussion. Okay, we end with the same thing, which is the case of meat and milk at the same table is different than our case, because over there, true, they're not supposed to know if they know each other, it's a problem, but that's only when there's no shinui. There's nothing different about the situation. That's why we say if I'm eating meat and you're eating dairy, we're not supposed to eat at the same table. But what if we put something on the table to remind us to separate, that we don't share food? Like you put, I don't know, anything that's not part of the meal, you can put on there. You can put your cell phone there, you can put a book there, anything that will remind us not to share food with one another. So here we have shinui, because the husband and wife might be in the same bed, but they're clothed, so we should say we can't derive their halacha from the case of meat and milk at the same table. So Tashma, we bring a proof from this. Lo yochal azav im azava mishum hergel avera. But we have the zav and the zava, it says they shouldn't eat at the same table. So it's a proof from our Mishnah. It's right there. And just like they can't eat at the same table, they shouldn't be sleeping in the same bed. But again, again here, there's no shinui. There's nothing different. In other words, they're sitting down in the same normal way, eating with each other. And we already said in the same normal way in the bed, without clothes, for sure you can't do. But here they're wearing clothes. So Tashma, come and listen. Now here we come with the proof. This is from Yechezkel describing a tzaddik. He never ate looking to the mountains. Okay, now the pshat of that might have some kind of idolatrous meaning, but the way that they learn it in the Midrash is is that the tzaddik doesn't have to look to the mountains to eat, meaning in his own zechut, in his own merit, he receives his parnasah. El Harim is El Hahorim, to our forefathers. In other words, the Midrash interprets it that the average person is only sustained because of our patriarchs, because of the Zechut Avot. But the true tzaddik, he doesn't need that. So El Harim Lo Achal means to the mountains he doesn't eat, means that he doesn't have to rely on the zechut of the patriarchs to be able to eat. Although in the pshat, it may have some more idolatrous connotation, that going to the mountains to eat meant something with avodah zarah lonas. And it says in his eyes, he never turned to the idols of the house of Israel. He never polluted the wife of his friend. And he never came close to a woman in the state of nida. So these two things are compared. Apparently there is an equation made between a man with his own wife who is in the state of nida and a man with his friend's wife. Just like we know that a man cannot sleep in the same bed with somebody else's wife, even if they have clothes on. That should be obvious. So therefore, so too, in other words, we compare a man with his wife when she is in the state of nida to a man with someone else's wife. So just like with someone else's wife, you would not sleep in the same bed with clothes on, even with clothes on. So too, you should not sleep in the same bed, even with clothes on, when your wife is in a state of nida.
That makes the most sense, because both are, Gilui Arayot at exactly the same level.
Yeah, they're at the same level, right. and the pasuk is showing that. Right. So what does Rashi say? Rashi says, how do we know that a man cannot sleep with another man's wife in the same bed, even if they have clothes on? Because of yichud, he says. Because they're being alone, they're secluding themselves, and that's certainly prohibited. Tosafot says that's not the reason. It's just because of the Yetzer Hara. It's because it's obvious, just from the standpoint of the Yetzer Hara, that you can't be with somebody else's wife under a blanket in a bed, even if you have clothes on. And so too, with your own wife, you can't be in that situation. Okay. So the Gemara concludes, and that is the halacha brought in Shulchan Aruch, that a man and woman cannot sleep in the same bed during nida, and everybody knows that. Upliga the Rabbi Padat, and this is an argument with Rabbi Padat. The Amar Rabbi Padat, because Rabbi Padat said, Lo asra Torah ela korva shel gilui arayot bilvad. He said that the only coming close that the Torah prohibited with regard is actual intimacy. Shenemar ish el kol she'er bisaro lo tikruvu legalot erva, because it says a man should not come close to his relative legalot erva, to uncover nakedness, meaning to have relations. And therefore, he holds, according to Rashi's interpretation here, that all other kreva, all other forms of closeness, of physical contact, are considered to be only rabbinically prohibited. So therefore he would say that it's a gezerah legezerah. How could you say it's already that they can't sleep together, even unclothed is already midrabanan. Even if they're touching each other, it's midrabanan. So as long as they don't have relations. So Rabbi Padat is not going to add to that they can't even sleep together with clothes on. So he's going to be lenient here. However, everybody else is stringent and is going to say that you can't do that. And then there's a Tosafot here that goes into exactly what Rabbi Padat would say about sleeping in the man in the other case before with somebody else's wife in the same bed wearing clothes. What would he say there? So the Tosafot goes into that issue. Obviously, the conclusion is that you can't. But
right, but does Tosfot explain what the reasoning is? Because that does make sense. That it is. The actual Gilu Arayot is.
Well, this is a machloket. In fact, the Rambam holds that any physical romantic contact with one of the Arayot is deoraita. The Rambam holds that.
That
even like hugging or kissing your wife, that's also a gilui arayot, because it says lo tikrevu legalot erva, don't come close. So they interpret that as a separate prohibition. Against Rabbi Padat would agree with the Ramban. The Ramban is the one that says that it's only rabbinical except for the actual intimacy. It's a machloket between the Rambam and the Ramban,
right.
And it seems to be based on this sugya, how we rule in this sugya here. Okay, ula ki haveate mibe rav. Now we're going to learn some things that some might consider mildly scandalous about some of the rabbis, perhaps. When he would come home from yeshiva, it says that that he would kiss his sisters on their chests, which is not exactly the most modest way to kiss somebody. Some say that he would kiss them on their hands, which is slightly more understandable, but still the point was that he was kissing somebody who was not permitted to him, from the standpoint of intimacy.
This is Rav.
This is Ula. Ula coming back from yeshiva. And he contradicts himself. The Amar Ula, because Ula himself said, "Afilu shum korva asur," that any physical contact is prohibited. Mishum lech amrei nizira sachor lecharma lo tikrav. That because of the principle that if a nazir needs to go somewhere, a nazir is prohibited to drink wine. If he needs to go somewhere, and it happens to be that the shortest path between where you are now and where the nazir needs to go is through a vineyard, we say to him, go around the vineyard, don't go through it. Just in case you're going to be tempted, you're going to see those grapes, you're going to see the wine, you're going to want to drink it. So we tell him, take the longer route and go around the kerem, go around the vineyard. So too, we say to a person, stay away from lech amrin nazira. We say to the person, don't kiss and hug the arayot, because it might lead to something else. And you see that there's a hey on afilu shum korva, because in the Rambam it's codified that way, that it's prohibited. And in fact, the Rambam would say it's deoraita, although he does say that if it's one of the arayot that a person naturally doesn't feel any attraction to, such as an older sister or an older aunt or something like that, that it doesn't really come under the prohibition, but he calls it Masekhet Tipshim. He says it's foolish, but not necessarily formally, officially under the heading of the prohibition. Tanad Eliyahu, the Yeshiva of Eliyahu taught, Masekhet Talmid Echad Shana Harbe V'Kara Harbe Shmesh Talmidei Chachamim Harbe. There was a story about one Talmid, a student who had learned a lot of Mishnah, knew a lot of Tanakh, served Talmidei Chachamim, which doesn't mean that he was a waiter in the restaurant of the Talmidei Chachamim. What it means is that he learned Gemara, he learned the reasons behind the Mishnah. He was an advanced student. But he died at half of his lifespan, like around 30 years old or something like that. He died. And she was going around with this tefillin to all of the houses of study and all of the synagogues. Why? She said, it says that the Torah is going to be your life and the length of your days. Ba'ali shishana harbe v'kar harbe. My husband, he learned a lot of Mishnah, he studied a lot of Tanakh, v'shimesh Talmidei Chachamim harbe, and he served lots of Talmidei Chachamim. Mipnei ma met v'chatzi yamav. Why did he die so young? She didn't know the Billy Joel song, only the good die young. She didn't hold by that. She said, why did he die young? It doesn't make any sense. Nobody could answer her. What are you going to say to somebody who asks you that, right? And they say, why did she carry around the tefillin? Because the tefillin is, associated with Torah, and Torah is supposed to be orech yamim and so on. It's supposed to give you length of days. So what happened? Once I was a guest by her, and this is talking about Eliyahu Navi, because this is Tanad of Eliyahu. So these are the reports from Eliyahu Navi. Was once a guest in the presence of this woman. She was telling this entire me'orah. She was telling this entire story. I said to her, Biti, my daughter, what was he like with you during your nidah? Were you guys frolicking? And what did she say? Amrali, chas v'shalom. God forbid. He didn't even touch my little finger. So he asked her, what about during your clean days? Because remember, the woman first has to have her days where she has a flow, and then she has to have the clean days where she's waiting to become tahor. But she hasn't gone to the mikveh yet. So what's the halacha during that time? She still needs that. Doesn't make a difference until she goes to the mikveh. So she said, "Achalimi v'shatayimi v'yashanimi v'kirov basar." He ate with me, he drank with me, and we slept together unclothed. Velo alta dato al davar acher, and he never even thought of doing something else. In other words, even though we weren't clothed and we were in the bed together naked, we never even thought about that. Now, obviously, they made a fundamental error here, because before going to the mikveh, she's just as good as not. She's still completely tme'ah. Ve'amarti la, and I said to her, Baruch hamakom sheharago. Blessed is God that killed him. Not very sensitive, perhaps.
Eliyahu Navi.
Yeah.
But it's Eliyahu Navi. Well, let's assume. Well, we remember Eliyahu Navi was he was a tough guy. Eliyahu Navi was always fire. Right? That's what you see from the Sefer Melachim. Whenever Eliyahu Navi does nisim, it's always with esh. Right? It's always with fire. He brings to the Nevi'eh Habal fire. He brings it's always esh. When he leaves, it's in a chariot of fire. What does Elisha do with water? He always brings water. Brings water to the people, because Eliyahu Navi withholds water and he brings fire. Because he's a fiery guy, and this is very consistent. Because he didn't respect the Torah. It says, don't go near a woman during your nidah, meaning even to sleep with her in the same bed, and certainly unclothed is not allowed, and therefore we understand why he suffered this punishment. Now obviously, he was asking her these leading questions because he knew the answer before he asked, because he's Eliyahu Navi. Otherwise, why would he randomly ask such personal questions at the table? Clearly, he had, he was aware from the beginning what the case was. And on the side here, Tosafot tries to explain what might have been going on that would have led them to have this misconception that there might have been a tradition in the Talmudic times that although they had the 7 clean days, that first they would go to the mikveh at the end of the first 7 days in accordance with the biblical rule, and then they would wait the clean days before going again to fulfill the rabbinic rule. So maybe it was in between, so he thought that it was okay that they might have gone twice. The Tosafot says that they might have gone twice, once because Minat Torah you're supposed to go after 7 days, and then we wait 7 clean days after that, as if every woman were a zava.
Right, exactly. And
now we only go one time. Right, that's really a rabbinical thing. So it could be that back then, because they had actual tahorot around, they had actual concerns about tumah v'tahorah, they might have done it differently. Tosafot suggests. It's a suggestion. We don't really know. Kiyata Rav Dimi Amar. When Rav Dimi came, he said, It must have been a very big bed. That's why they rationalized it. They're trying to explain why he did this. In the West, they said, Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef Sidnar Mafsik Beino Levina. She was wearing a special apron covering her lower body to separate between them. In other words, they were trying to be milamed zechut, to explain what they must have thought or what they must have done to rationalize this away. It can't be that they were just cuddling up together without clothes on during this time, but there must have been an explanation for it. Now we come to the new Mishnah. Or Ben Gurion, it says in the version of the Mishnah that these are the halachot that were stated in the attic of Hananiah ben Chizkiah ben Gurion, that they came up to greet him. That there was a vote, and for the first time Beit Shammai outvoted Beit Hillel, there was a majority of Shammaites in the Congress. They outvoted Beit Hillel, and they passed 18 gezerot.
This is going to go on
in that meeting. Yeah, then we're going to go on huge changes next 4 dapim. Amar le Abai le Rav Yosef. Abai said to Rav Yosef, Elutnan or ve'elutnan? We have in our Gemara, obviously it says ve'elu, but they didn't have it so clear, so they asked. They had different versions. Which is correct? Elu or ve'elu? Ve'elutnan, if it says and these, so hane da'amaran, that means that the gezerot that we already mentioned before, plus some more gezerot that we're going to mention now, are all included in the 18. Oh, elutnan, or did you mean these are the gezerot, meaning what we're about to mention, but not what was mentioned before? Oh, elutnan, right? Right. So either with the vav or without. Meaning, diba'enan lememar kaman, what we are going to say moving forward. So there's 2 possibilities. The vav would mean we're starting a totally new subject, and these are the gezerot, right? But I'm sorry, the other way around. Ve'elu would be, and these are the gezerot, meaning the ones that I said plus more. Elu would mean these are the gezerot. It's a new subject. We're not continuing. Ve is always vav achibur, means we're continuing what we did before. So ve'elu would mean, and these plus additional ones are the gezerot. Elu would mean it's a totally new topic. These are the new gezerot. So that's the question. So Tashma come in here. En polin la'oraner ve'en korin la'oraner ve'elu min ha'halachot shamru ba'aliyat Chananya ben Chizkiyahu ben Garyon. Shema mina ve'elutnan shema mina. So what do we see from here? In this Braita it says, don't delouse by the light of a candle. Don't read by the light of a candle on Shabbat. And these are among the halachot that were stated in the attic of Chananya ben Chizkiyahu ben Gurion. Hear from this that it's ve'elu. In other words, those 2 gezerot were included in these 18 that we're going to be specifying in the coming dapim. It's not elu, which would be a totally new, it would be a break from the previous subject. It's ve'elu, which is a continuation of the previous subject. Tan Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Mi katav Megillat Tanit. Who wrote Megillat Tanit? Megillat Tanit is a collection of, a list basically of, it's a Braita actually, collection of days that they did not fast. You were not allowed to fast, or you weren't allowed to give eulogies. And these were all many, many days on the calendar that they had as mini Yamim Tovim. Like today, we wouldn't say Tachanun probably on these days. So they, but however, at a certain point, Batla Megillat Ta'anit, they stopped following Megillat Ta'anit. It fell out of practice. But there was a time where it was a text that would tell you whether you were allowed to fast or give eulogies on a particular day. So who wrote it? Amru, they said, Chananya ben Chizkiyahu v'siyato. It was Chananya ben Chizkiah and his group, Shayu mechabevin at hatzarot, because they loved the suffering. Mechabevin hatzarot. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that they loved the suffering part. It means that they appreciated the deliverance, the divine intervention so much that they had all these different days when different miracles, minor miracles occurred, that they wanted to remember and they wanted to celebrate every year. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Af anu mechabevin hatzarot. We love the tzarot too. It's a funny way to say it. What they mean is, being saved from it. The problem is that for us, if we wanted to write everything down, we have so many tzarot that we're saved from, we would never finish writing. So what could we do? Rashi says either that means we there's so many troubles we wouldn't be able to write it, or it means that we couldn't possibly have a Yom Tov every single day. Right? Either it's saying that we don't have the ability to write all of our tzarot out, or it means we couldn't declare so many days of happiness because there's so many times we're saved from our enemies. Every day would be a holiday. Davar acher, another way of saying it, en shotet nifga. The fool is never hurt. In other words, since he's so desensitized, there's so many things that happen to him that are bad because he's a fool, that he's not even able to identify them anymore. He's battered by all the different things, as Rashi says here. En pegarabalav, nothing bad happens to him. Klomar, eno makir b'pka'av. He doesn't recognize the bad things that happen to him. Kach kama nisim ba'im lanu ve'anu makirin ben. We suffer so much, and there are so many miracles happening behind the scenes to save us all the time. We don't even fully recognize them, so we're not able to really memorialize them. Davar acher, another version, en basara met margish be'izmel, that it means that the flesh of the dead doesn't feel the knife. In other words, we're so desensitized, we suffer so much. It's not that we don't recognize the miracles because they're constant. It's that we suffer so much we don't even feel the tzarot anymore. We don't even feel the pain anymore. Just like dead flesh doesn't feel the knife. Any, is that true? Va'amar Rav Yitzchak said, Kashar rima lamet kemachat bebasar chayim. Didn't Rav Yitzchak say that for the dead body, the worm in the dead body is as painful as a knife or as a pin, as a needle in the flesh of a living person. Because it says his flesh is going to be pained for him and his soul is going to mourn. And it's talking about the person who has passed away and his body is decaying. So it sounds like he does feel something. Now the Mefarshim explain that this doesn't mean that we believe that the physical body of the dead person is actually feeling something. We know that the person is deceased. It doesn't feel something. What it means is that the soul is pained by the fact. Just like the body is pained when a needle penetrates it when you're alive, the soul is pained by the fact that the body decays and is infested with worms. Because the soul put so much stock in the body while it was alive, and now it's pained that it sees that what it invested so much in is, decaying away. So why would you use that example that we're desensitized to the problems that we have, just like a dead body is desensitized to, or a dead person is desensitized to a knife entering its flesh, when that's not exactly true. What we mean is that if you have dead flesh in your body, in other words, sometimes a person will have a situation where their flesh loses all sensation. So it's just like that. A live person, when the needle goes into that part of their flesh, they don't feel anything. So too, we're so desensitized and battered in the exile, we don't feel anything anymore. Amar Rav Yehuda said, Amar Rav, that Rav said, we should remember this man for good. Chananya ben Chizkiah is his name. If not for him, Nignaz Sefer Yecheskel, then they would have put Sefer Yecheskel away. They would have sealed it away. Shayu dvarav sotrin divrei Torah, because its words seem to contradict the words of the Torah. Me'asa, what did he do? He'elulo gimel me'od garvei shemen. He literally burned the midnight oil, guys. Okay, they brought him 300 barrels of oil, and what was the oil for? V'yashav b'aliyav udrashan. He sat up in his attic, and by the light of this oil, worked out the drashot and explanations of the entire book of Yechezkel, so that it would not contradict the Torah. What are some examples where it contradicts the Torah? For instance, it mentions that the Kohanim should not eat nevelan trefa, that they shouldn't eat torn animals or animals that died without shechita, and that's something that really applies to all Jews, not just Kohanim. So it seems to contradict the Torah that tells us that even a regular Jew can't eat trefa and nevela. Another example is that it mentions that on the seventh day of the seventh month, that there's going to be a special korban brought on a day that there's no indication in the Torah that there would be a korban on that day. So what is this korban that's being referenced in the Torah? That I'm seeing, in Sefer Yechezkel, that there's no precedent for it in the anywhere in the Torah itself. So Sefer Yechezkel would seem to contradict, therefore, many things in the Torah. That's just two examples. It mentions laws about who the Kohanim are allowed to marry that contradict what it says in Parashat Emor, that are more stringent than Parashat Emor, because it says, we read that Haftarah, because it says the Kohanim can only marry almanot from other Kohanim, only women who are widowed from other Kohanim, but that's not what the halacha is. Really, a regular Kohen can marry any almana, any widow. So only the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to. So there's some problems. So Chananya ben Chizkiah went and he worked out solutions for all of these problems.
What is this book that Chananya